Good morning, Foreign Minister, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fullerton, and I'm the Executive Director of IISS Asia here in Singapore. On behalf of Dr. Bastian Giegerich, our Director General and Chief Executive, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this special event here in the historic Straits Room at the Fullerton Hotel in Singapore. Through its convening, the IISS aims to inspire informed and intelligent public debate on matters of international importance from an international perspective. Today's event is very much in line with that mission, and it's my honor to welcome back to the IISS and the Fullerton Hotel Senator, the Honorable Penny Wong, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Australia. Today, she will discuss Australia's foreign policy approach in an uncertain world, focusing on Australia's deep commitment to Southeast Asia. As the year comes to a close, it's clear that the political change and events of this year and next will have significant implications for the international system. Minister, as you poignantly remarked earlier this year, the world has seen more conflict than any time since World War II, from Russia's invasion to Ukraine, to Sudan and Myanmar, Yemen, and Gaza. In the gray zone, intensified competition, tension, and confrontation take place below the threshold of conflict, but are problematic all the same in their use of obfuscation and blurring of rules as tactics. These types of pressures are far from insignificant or few. They range from cyber attacks and disinformation to economic coercion and lawfare, as well as threats to critical national infrastructure, including in the subsea domain. Compounding all of this is, of course, the environment, where effects are particularly felt by island nations. Indeed, just yesterday, a landmark case on the obligations of states in respect of climate change was commenced at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the largest case in the court's history, in which 99 countries, including Australia, and a dozen intergovernmental organizations will participate in hearings over the next 2 weeks. Although the case highlights the extent of the climate crisis, it is also a reminder that the international rules-based order is still alive, even if it might not always be well. The growing pace and scale of challenges to global and regional multilateral institutions has catalyzed once more debates on whether existing institutions are fit for purpose, or whether they can be complemented by new initiatives. Australia offers a unique example of a country that fervently supports and invests in international institutions, from the UN to ASEAN and PIF, while also crafting new partnerships and initiatives, whether the Quad, AUKUS, CPTPP, Global Digital Compact, or the various initiatives that seek to improve international development financing architecture. Turning to Southeast Asia, Australia has launched a dedicated economic strategy in order to bolster trade, investment, and cooperation on both opportunities and challenges. Whether on security, climate, or trade, now more than ever, constructive and collective solutions are required. Minister, we greatly look forward to exploring this with you in more detail in today's discussion. Minister Wong has had an illustrious career with several distinguished posts in government. She was appointed Foreign Minister in 2022, having previously served as Shadow Foreign Minister for 6 years prior. Having studied law and arts at the University of Adelaide, Minister Wong commenced her career with several roles that focused on socioeconomic and environmental policy issues before becoming a barrister. In 2001, she was elected to the Senate for the Australian Labor Party and has since been re-elected 4 times, most recently in 2022. In 2007, she was appointed Minister for Climate Change and Water, and in 2010, she was appointed Minister for Finance and Deregulation. In 2013, Minister Wong was elected leader of the government in the Senate, and after the change in government that year, assumed the role of leader of the opposition in the Senate, the first woman to hold either of these roles. Before we begin, a few housekeeping announcements. May I please ask you all to switch off your mobile phones or switch them to silent. In the event of an emergency, please follow IISS staff or hotel staff who will guide you out. Minister Wong will speak for around 10 minutes, after which we'll have a period of around 20 minutes for our discussion and Q&A. The entire lecture and the Q&A will be on the record. For those of you joining us virtually, please do already start to type your questions in the Q&A box. Minister, we greatly look forward to your remarks today and the discussion that will follow. And without further ado, this floor and the podium are yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phila, for that kind introduction, and I note your exhortation to be intelligent and insightful, and I would certainly try. I want to acknowledge the many distinguished guests in the room and say to you, it's just fantastic to be back in Singapore. It's a place I've spent a lot of time as a child. In fact, I think my father and my brother and I stayed in the hotel I'm staying in currently. And it is also a great pleasure to be speaking here again at the IISS event. It was, as you mentioned, one of the very first speeches I gave as Foreign Minister about 2.5 years ago. And it outlined our approach to the region in particular, and I'll be pleased to talk you through some of what we've achieved since that time. But of course, the reality is a lot has also changed in that time, both for our region and also globally. To borrow Prime Minister Wong's description, we are living in what he describes as a more dangerous and turbulent world. More people displaced, more people hungry, the climate changing faster than our collective efforts to stop it, greater risk of nuclear conflict, and conflict, as Viola said, from Sudan to Myanmar, from Yemen to Gaza, and of course Russia's illegal and moral invasion of Ukraine is now aided by troops from North Korea. Another clear example of the way in which heightened geostrategic uncertainty and threats to the international rules-based order affects us all. Now, you've probably heard me speak often about our region and often about the region we want. Part of this is because so much of the discussion in Asia has traditionally been about China, and if not about China, about the United States and China. This is not to say, of course, that strategic competition doesn't matter to us, and that China doesn't matter to us, as is demonstrated by the consistent efforts the Australian government has had to restore dialogue and engagement in the China relationship. It's a relationship of huge consequence to Australia, and the great power relationship is of huge consequence to us as to all the world. But the way we manage our interests in the face of challenges involving great powers is only partly through our direct dealing. Much of the answer lies in approaching these challenges in regional terms. There is a lot that happens in the thousands of kilometres between Australia, the United States and China, just as there is a lot that happens in the broader Indo-Pacific. I often say when we look up to the world from Australia, we see Southeast Asia. We understand deeply that Southeast Asia is central to Australia's future. This space is central to Australia's future. This is where we need greater understanding, both from our analysts and commentators, but also within the polity. That's why the Australian government has worked in such a focused way to upgrade our relationships with many Southeast Asian countries. And I will talk more about that and our relationship with Singapore shortly. And it's why it's incumbent upon us to work with the region to shape the region we want. I describe it as peaceful, stable and prosperous. A region respectful of sovereignty, where disputes are addressed in accordance with international law and norms, not only by power and size. This is a principle that matters to Australia. It is a principle that matters deeply to Singapore. Of course, we know that the rules and norms that help keep us safe are under pressure, and the region is becoming more unstable. In Myanmar, we see more violence, we see a pretty difficult track in terms of its economy, and we see instability and insecurity. and I would say again, the regime's continued and violent repression of its people must end. We want the regime to fulfil its commitment under ASEAN's 5-point consensus and to engage meaningfully with ASEAN representatives. Genuine inclusive dialogue is vital, and we stand ready to work with ASEAN and other partners to find ways that encourage that dialogue between all players in Myanmar. We urge the regime to take a different path and to bring to the table any support that will help make a difference. We also in our region do see China's efforts to normalise dangerous actions towards Philippines and Taiwan. And we have consistently articulated our view as to the importance of peace and stability in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. See, what happens in the Taiwan Strait, what happens in the South China Sea, what happens in the Mekong, what happens across the Indo-Pacific does affect us all. And when disputes arise, and they inevitably will, we want to insist that those differences are managed through dialogue, not simply by force or the exercise of raw power, which is why we welcome the resumption of dialogue between the United States and China, and we will continue to publicly and privately articulate our hope, our expectation that I'm sure is shared, that both these great powers manage competition responsibly. Dialogue, open channels of communication are essential to that responsible management of competition. Now more than ever, we need what ASEAN describes as preventive architecture to increase resilience and conflict prevention mechanisms to provide transparency and reassurance. And we want to support the countries of ASEAN to ensure collectively we all have the practical tools we need to be able to rapidly and effectively work to de-escalate tensions and crises. Ultimately, what we want is a world where we can find collective solutions to our toughest problems. This is the world Australia strives for. And it is why we place so much value on our long partnership with ASEAN and strongly support ASEAN centrality. Foreign Minister Balakrishnan recently put it this way: ASEAN is the region's centre of gravity, which brings all the key players together to find common ground. Being in Singapore, I don't need to give this audience a lecture about the history of ASEAN. I would make a few observations. That ASEAN has long understood the importance of collaboration, of engagement, of negotiation of differences, and of acting to shape the region. ASEAN remains vital to the stability of the region, even more so as the rules and norms which underpin peace and stability are being challenged and are being tested. To paraphrase Prime Minister Wong's words, in a more dangerous and turbulent world, holding the centre, assuring ASEAN centrality, is harder, but it is even more important. We're ASEAN's first dialogue partner and first comprehensive, one of the first comprehensive strategic partners. We have a deep and enduring friendship with ASEAN as an entity and with the countries of ASEAN. And that relationship is built on mutual trust, on shared interests, and a positive vision for the region's future. And together we've achieved a great deal. We cooperate in climate and energy, including the IISS for ASEAN's Futures Initiative, providing new scholarships to meet ASEAN's priorities, working together on maritime initiatives, including maritime capacity building, which is about furthering peace and stability in the region. And we also look forward to Timor-Leste and the roadmap anchoring it as such a young nation in our region's architecture. We all know about the rapid economic growth of this region, quite remarkable. And we are committed to a greater economic engagement because that is underpinning the region we want. And we know we have more work to do. Which is why one of our first actions as a government 2.5 years ago was to develop an economic strategy for Southeast Asia. We understood that was a requirement, was an imperative for deepening our engagement. So in September 2023, the ASEAN Pacific Forum in Jakarta, Prime Minister Albanese launched Invested Australia's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040. And in the 12 months since its launch, since the launch of this strategy, we have made tangible progress. We've taken action to implement a number of initiatives, including new deal teams to identify and facilitate Australian investment in the region, new landing pads in Jakarta and Ho Chi Minh, in addition to the existing hub in Singapore, to help tech companies scale up, business and investment missions, including 3 here, one of which was our largest ever outbound investment mission by value, representing a combined $2.5 trillion of assets under management. We've improved visa access for business people in the region, and we've established the ASEAN Australia Centre to drive greater Southeast Asia literacy and enhance business enterprise. And Australia will look for more opportunities and initiatives to deepen engagement. And of course, part of this work is also a desire to deepen what are already deep ties with Singapore. I'm looking forward to meeting again Prime Minister Wong later today, and Deputy Prime Minister Gunn, Foreign Minister Balakrishnan, who I had breakfast with, and Defence Minister to discuss our ambition for the next stage of our important partnership. Singapore is one of Australia's closest and most trusted partners. We've got a long partnership based on mutual respect and a proven track record of cooperation. Our geography, our shared history create a deep reservoir of trust. We were the second country in the world to recognise Singapore's independence. And today, our friendship is underpinned by this strategic trust, but also a complementary economic interest and a commitment to work together on the challenges today and tomorrow, including the region's energy transition. Next year, we celebrate 60 years of diplomatic relations and the first decade of our comprehensive strategic partnership. And we achieved a great deal under this partnership. From boosting our cooperation in defence and security, our significant trade and investment, our first-of-a-kind green economy agreement, science, tech, innovation, cooperation, digital economy agreement, and our work together through our food pact. Foreign Minister Vivian would say we have many pathway initiatives with Singapore, but we want to build on. So as we look forward to our 60th anniversary year, we IISS to ensure its pace with our collective ambition. Together we are addressing challenges and creating new opportunities to ensure a better future for our nation and importantly the region we share. We want to forge a closer partnership with Singapore and other Southeast Asian countries as with ASEAN. Why do we want to do that? To build the foundations of our future together, for our nation and for the region as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Wong, for those very insightful remarks. I think we'll have a 10-minute discussion just between the two of us first to kick us off. We'll open it up to the floor for any questions. When we get to that part, do raise your hand up very high and announce who you are so that I can call on you. But in the meantime, perhaps I can ask you the first question, which is, you've pointed out the tensions and the competition in the world, especially in the Asia-Pacific region as well. I wondered, while we've recently seen the resumption of US-China dialogue, competition between these two countries does seem to be continuing. It doesn't seem to be waning. And so I wondered what Australia's role is in stabilizing that, or in stabilizing that dynamic in this region, and how its vision for balancing security and prosperity can aid to that effect.
Well, I mean, great powers will do what great powers do, and I think that we are self-evidently in a period of where both countries have articulated very public how they perceive their interests, and we know that President-elect Trump has made clear he is a leader who comes to the office with a desire for change, so we shouldn't be surprised if things do change. And I think President Xi has articulated his view about China's place in the world. I think, and I touched upon it in the speech, I think it's important we all have to seek to manage set our relationships with great powers wisely, and we seek to, you know. Obviously, we're an ally of the US. We seek to, so we've sought to stabilise our relationship with China for all the reasons I've articulated. But I do think that looking at
what we are
doing
doing
in our region together
is actually a central contribution to stability. So you asked a question which is, you know, essentially how do we assure stability in a time of competition? I think it's not the only way, but the central way in which we do that is what we do together to assure stability in our region. The principles by which the region operates, how we deal with disputes, how we work together to try and support, encourage, facilitate, buttress the norms that have enabled the region to develop as well as it has.
Do you think, can I just follow up on that a little bit, do you think that the, I suppose, crisis management mechanisms that exist in this region, do you think that they're sufficient for that?
And I talked about this a bit in the speech. Probably, I mean, we've talked about this, you know, a bit in the EIS context and bilaterally. I mean, I think that it is always useful to think about what is it that we can collectively do to assure stability. I talked about preventive architecture, which is essentially places, forums that we get together and talk about how we deal with disputes. And then there are specific mechanisms which are responding to crises. And I think always more can be done. We certainly very early on were amongst the countries saying to the US and China, we encourage there to be very robust discipline mechanisms to avert conflict. Because of course conflict can arise from disputes, but it can also arise from misunderstanding. And so you need to be able to avert escalation.
Absolutely. Maybe turning to economic policy, and you mentioned this already in your speech, the strategy that Australia has developed specifically for Southeast Asia. I mean, looking at Southeast Asia specifically, I wondered whether, you know, of course, their opportunities here are immense for that, for Australia's engagement and I suppose, you know, added value in the wider equation. But there are challenges as well, and I think you know, there has been, of course, the use of economic statecraft in this region. Australia knows that well, but there's also growing securitization of trade and securitization of investment, and the tendency by some to veer towards protectionism, or what some, I suppose, are calling deglobalization. And I guess my question is, how does Australia's economic strategy toward this region weather those geopolitical and geoeconomic tensions?
Okay, so two separate points. The first is our relationship in terms of our economic engagement with Southeast Asia. And I've been upfront with Australian business and the community. We're underdone. You know, we are underdone in terms of our investment. We know that. And so part of what we are doing with the economic strategy to 2040 is to try and remedy is possibly a strong word, but to turn that around. And we want to do that for our benefit. You know, there's an economic benefit to stronger investment in Southeast Asia, given where the region is going, but also because we recognise if we want that deep reservoir of trust that is so important to relationships, the economic piece is such an important part of our relationship with Southeast Asian countries, and we've got a responsibility to do better there. But you're asking a bigger question, aren't you? You're asking, how do you navigate in a world where you know, there is more, you know, the great powers in particular, but not only, are articulating a set of policies or demonstrating a set of policies which differ from how we have envisaged global trade. And I'd say two things. First, you know, we should have some confidence in ourselves to navigate a period of change. That's what we have to do, and we should have some confidence in that. Second, it's not entirely new for countries of different sizes to have different understandings or different views about their economic interests. So Singapore and Australia have had a much more open trade position than many countries in the world, because we have seen really clearly why our economic interests, our national interests, are best served by open and predictable trading and investment arrangements. So I think we have, as two countries, we might have come from different perspectives. There are different reasons why we might have come to the same position. So we will continue to articulate that view as a matter of our national interest, but also because we think it is a good thing for stability. It may not be a view that everyone shares, but it's a pretty consistent position for our two nations.
Thank you. I mean, turning to Singapore and Australia in your bilateral relationship, you've highlighted just the extraordinary set of agenda points and initiatives that you're exploring together. What is the best mechanism for that bilateral relationship to have a regional impact? Perhaps when we take, for example, the green energy transition.
It's a really good question, and given we're in the midst of thinking about what is the next generation of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership look like, I'm very happy to receive the wisdom on the room on this, but because I've asked myself the same question, and because you want to be partners, obviously, and there's we are strategic partners in many ways, but we also want to think about what are the things we want to do together that will matter to the region in 5 and 10 years' time. And when I first engaged with Vivian, Minister Vivian, that's what so I think he's described it. Minister Vivian, he talked a lot about the transition, the energy transition, and how he thinks about it is this is what we're trying to do in ASEAN, and the bilateral relationship with Australia and what we are doing with our various aspects of our economic partnership, including the green energy, is part of that transition in the region. So I think we can step up there. We have to find the mechanism which sort of accelerates that.
Thank you very much. I think we'll open the questions to the floor. So I see a couple of hands already.
They might be more difficult. Maybe I should just keep talking to you.
We could do that for sure.
I'm only kidding.
Perhaps on the right-hand side, Mr. Ian Chong.
Hello, Minister. Good to see you again.
Hello.
Ian Chong, National University of Singapore, Carnegie, China. So when you began your remarks, you talked about the international system and international order that is increasingly under stress. Mm-hmm. And I suppose, given the direction of travel of the Trump team, and also big powers like Russia, China, the UN system, the world trading system, will be under more stress going forward. How do you envision Australia navigating that kind of system, helping to hold it together? Where does Southeast Asia and Singapore fit into that plan?
I think can I start by talking about agency? Like, I don't think it is a good thing for small and medium-sized countries to believe that they're simply sort of passive observers about what other powers do. Now, I'm not being naive, we're 26 million people, right? But I think all of us have a view about how multilateral systems operate. We may not always get our way. People may have different views, but we should recognise have some confidence in our own capacity not only to navigate, but also our capacity to work together with other like-minded countries to protect some of the issues that we care about. So I think we are coming into a period of change. I think that's self-evident. But I also think there are many countries whose national interests around the multilateral system, around the principles around international law, the rule of law, predictable open trading arrangements. There are many countries that have very similar views. So we do have to work together to protect those things we think are important, but also to navigate this period of change in a way that
enables us to maintain prosperity and security. That's not just buzzwords. Like, I think it is important that the ballast of the international system, which is others, work together where we can.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, on the right-hand side there, the lady in the red, Big Tren.
Good morning. My name is Big Chan. I'm with the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. So, Minister, you mentioned strategic trust in your remarks. So, I wonder, what does it mean to Australia, and how Australia can enhance strategic trust with partners who have different political systems? Thanks.
Yeah, I use the phrase strategic trust particularly in relation to Singapore, and I did that deliberately because I think there is. And that is in part, how do you develop strategic trust? It's not a mathematical process, is it? I mean, there's a history, there's a geography, there's the dependability that we have shown each other. But I do think part of approaching relationships is to understand what the other's perspective is, what the other country, the other is seeking, and to understand where there is therefore alignment. So not everybody is going to agree with every aspect of each other's foreign policy or defence policy, but we do share objectives, or certainly parts of objectives. It's a bit like my response to the gentleman over here around predictable trading arrangements. So for me, how I think about it, which is probably a bit of a sort of old negotiator perspective, is how do I find that common ground? And in part it is habits, in part it is engagement, it's dialogue, all of that, but it's also understanding really clearly and getting an understanding. What is it that you want? What is it that what are you seeking? And where can we work together? Because it's also what we're seeking. Where can we work together to try and assure that?
Thank you. I think there was another question there. Yes, front row. Yes. There.
Thank you. I'm Asanga, a senior fellow from the Millennium Project in Washington, D.C. My question is about India. India, Australia's relationship with India, as well as India's periphery, is having a lot of tension and instability, like Bangladesh. You mentioned about Myanmar, Sri Lanka. How, with these present situations, with the Adani investigation, corruption investigations, and all that, how would you sort of see the US-India relations and also the stability of South Asia? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure it probably is better for the Australian Foreign Minister to talk about the Australia-India relationship rather than commenting on the US-India relationship, but I understand the point you're making. I have, there is no Foreign Minister or no counterpart with whom I've met more than Dr. Jaishankar. And that is in part because of the architecture that we share. It's in part because things like the Quad and so forth. It's partly also we recognise the importance of each other's country to achieve the sort of world we want. We think we see India, as I'm sure others do, as a critical power, particularly in the Indian Ocean, but more generally. And we seek to work with India. Now, in any relationship, there will be differences of view, differences of perspective, differences of how we might approach certain issues, and you averted to some of them in your question. But fundamentally, if I go to what are we seeking, what's the end point, take a teleological view, I see a great deal of alignment between how India perceives its objectives for a more stable and prosperous world, and certainly for Australia. Obviously, we're a much smaller partner.
And Veer Pratap Singh from the IISS.
Thank you. Going to some of the themes that you mentioned in your speech around about maintaining norms and avoiding escalation. In July, the ASD shifted with its existing norm in attributing cyber operation to the government of China. I wanted to understand the foreign ministry's thoughts on this, specifically whether this was a shift to better align with the practices of other Five Eyes nations and allies, and potentially whether this was also a result of hurdles in negotiating with the Chinese side on expressing objections to these type of actions. Thank you.
First, we do things, whether it's this or other things. Obviously, we do it in may choose to act in concert with others, but fundamentally, we make a decision about what we think is in Australia's interests. And secondly, we think through attribution is one of the ways in which you express a view about norms. You express a view about what sort of behaviours you think should be either encouraged or discouraged or prescribed. And I see attribution as an aspect of that broader norm setting, but also more specifically.
Thank you. I think we had some more hands on the right-hand side. Evan Laxmana from the IISS.
Good morning, Minister.
Morning.
Just two related questions, if you don't mind. First, you talked about preventive architecture and the role of ASEAN. My first question deals with the East Asia Summit that you mentioned. Now that we know, the ASEAN Regional Forum has been stuck in preventive diplomacy second gear for the last 20 years, how would you envision the East Asia Summit moving forward to have more of these practical crisis management mechanisms?
I don't want... Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I guess the second question is a bit more on the practical side, which is a few of these Southeast Asian states have been discussing ways to potentially respond to a Taiwan contingency by focusing on non-combatant evacuation operations. There is, after all, more than 500,000 Southeast Asians in Taiwan. So how does Australia intend to support ASEAN member states who are in these discussions to eventually have NEOs down the line? Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm sure you're not surprised that I'm not going to actually respond to the hypothetical in the second question, other than to say, we support the status quo and urge all countries to respect the status quo and to, and we urge there be no unilateral change to the status quo. In relation to the first part, I had heard the second gear quote. That's quite evocative. I suppose what I'd say first is I don't want to be... Australia shouldn't be the country telling ASEAN what it has to do on preventive architecture or conflict resolution. But my observation is it does matter. Like, this is one of the key ways in which centrality has some traction, is that if you can utilise the entity, its forums and mechanisms that ASEAN promotes in order to try and support stability and manage conflict, that for me is precisely the sort of centrality that we want in a world where there are a few more disputes. So, we're up for being a good partner in that. We're the first dialogue partner, we're a comprehensive strategic partner. We're up for what it is that ASEAN would seek to play that role even more strongly. But the fact that EAS and ARF are challenging at times because of the differences of views, to flip it around is also an example that it also exemplifies their utility. Because they are contexts where some of these disputes can be at least navigated. So I don't have an answer on the specific conflict prevention, conflict avoidance mechanism or preventive architecture that I would advocate. We have thoughts. But fundamentally, it's how do you envisage the role of ASEAN and how do you construct or construe centrality at this time? And I think this is at the heart of it. And we want to be a partner in that.
I'll take a question from Julia Vu from the IISS.
Thank you. Thank you, Foreign Minister. So I think, you know, the region, as in many parts of the world, are trying to manage or deal with cybercrime. Earlier this year, your likeness, as well as a few other members of the Australian governments, were used in investment scams. So could you just share a little bit about how you're working with countries in the region to tackle this issue?
Wow. This is really hard, isn't it? I mean, I think in your opening remarks, really, you talked about disruptive behaviours short of conflict. I can't remember, you used a more articulate phrase, but that was the concept, and I see this in that way. You know, how do we deal with, as an international community and in a region, with actions and behaviours which are disruptive, fundamentally disruptive, not just of the international system, but of nation states and their democracies? How do we effectively deal with it? You know, we obviously, there is work I could talk to you about that we are doing in the cyberspace in Australia, but I actually think this is a bigger issue that the international community is insufficiently addressed, and you know, hopefully this is something particularly Singapore can be a bit of a thought leader in, because I see this as one of the ways in which other parties, disruptive forces, can really disrupt the integrity of the nation state. And that's a problem for stability. And we as an international community are insufficiently tooled up to counter it. So yes, cyber matters a great deal. It matters a great deal to, you know, domestic politics, to stability, etc. But I think we need to do more together to work out how we counter it. And I suspect your generation will be better at it, coming up with those answers.
Well, that's what we do at the IISS. So I will ask one final question from our virtual audience member, who has asked, where would Australia like to take the Quad in regard to the grouping's approach to technology and security? The US approach to sharing technology may change, affecting such minilaterals. And I might add to that, what would the impact of that be for Southeast Asia in terms of the Quad working with Southeast Asia in the realm of technology?
Look, I think in a world, to go back to one of the earlier questions, which is essentially the multilateral system is under stress. You see the benefit in regional and minilateral organisations. And for those organisations to focus on, or those groupings to focus on things where they can, you know, make a difference. So there's obviously a public goods agenda to what the Quad does. It's a very significant, important grouping, you know, which really its elevation or its pathway really began under the Trump presidency, and obviously at leader level with President Biden. So there's been a kind of bipartisan approach to it. I think, you know, the countries of the Quad look to what are the areas where we can make a difference. Technology is one of them, but obviously each country reflects its particular policy perspective about how it wishes to do that.
Yeah. Minister, we've run out of time. I know that there were so many other hands in the audience, so forgive me for not being able to call on you, but I just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule today. We wish you all the best with the rest of your day and your meetings and your further travels, and we hope to see you again perhaps in a few years' time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look forward to it. Thank you very much.
If everyone could please... Thank you.